George Stevens, Jr., a filmmaker and Emmy Award-winning television producer and the founding director of the American Film Institute. Thanks for being here, George.
Thank you, Bob.
We appreciate it. We're about to see George Stevens Sr.'s film, Shane, certainly one of the most celebrated Westerns ever made. It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including one for George Stevens as Best Director and also one for Best Picture of the Year. It also won the Oscar for cinematography. And right now, we're going to see TCM's premiere of a restored print of Shane, so we'll have the best possible look at some of the most vivid Technicolor ever filmed. But much of the beauty of Shane really lies in its story and in the relationship between Alan Ladd as Shane and Brandon DeWilde as the young boy who idolizes Shane. George, is this a movie that holds any particular place in your heart among your dad's films?
Oh, it does. I mean, my father cared about making films. He talked about, the test of time, and he really wanted his films to be successful when they came out, but he really also thought about them being around for the long haul. And Shane really has such a validity, over time. And it was the first picture I worked on location up in Jackson Hole.
Doing what?
I was a company clerk. I had a job, and it was my first real look at how, a film is put together. And he had just come back from the war, or had, some years before, and he talked about coming back from the war, and he'd seen one film in 3 years. He had just gone on to a different life, being in command of the combat motion picture photography in Europe. And he said he came back and he'd see these pictures, and he kind of referred to John Wayne films where people were shooting people, with 45s, and they'd get up and start shooting again. And he wanted in Shane to show what the impact of a single bullet on a human being can be. And that was one of the themes of Shane, and certainly the memorable scene with Elisha Cook being shot in front of the saloon, which was really a landmark scene for its time. And of course, it's a human story of a family and the young boy who idolizes this Western figure. And I think so interestingly, a kind of, you might say, a non-love story between Shane and Jean Arthur, who plays the wife of Van Heflin. And there's never a thing said between them, but in watching that film, you realize that an attachment has grown, and I think it's kind of delicate and beautiful.
Was this the first time you'd ever been on a set to actually watch your father from beginning to end in filming a movie?
Yes, it was. And I was also around for much of the editing. And he used to say that, the shooting of the script, the preparing of the script, the shooting of the film, and the editing, those 3 parts of the film, that the editing was to him the one part he could never give up. It was where he really made his films.
About Jean Arthur, this was the last film I believe Jean Arthur ever made.
Yeah.
What are your own memories of Jean Arthur?
Well, I really remember her from films for the most part, and she, originally Shane was going to be made with Montgomery Clift playing Shane, William Holden playing the Van Heflin part, and another woman playing the Jean Arthur part. And
that's an interesting combination.
And Clift went away, and then Bill Holden said, well, if Monty's not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. And there's a famous story of my father going into Frank Freeman, the head of Paramount Pictures. And Frank said, well, gosh, we can't start this picture now because we don't have a cast. And Dad said, Frank, I think in that drawer there you've got a list of your contract players, people you have commitments from. And Freeman kind of reached in it, and Dad took it from him, and he looked and he said, you've got a picture with Alan Ladd? He said, he'll be fine in this. He said, Van Heflin, he's very good. And then he looked down the list, and they had a picture with Jean Arthur, who by this time was an older woman. She had gray hair. She wears a blonde wig in the picture. And he said, Jean Arthur's always been good to me when we've worked together. And he said, let's make the picture with those 3.
Wow. Good call. Here it is, one of the great Westerns ever made, Shane, directed by George Stevens.